Hello everyone, welcome once again to another edition of podcast with Professor Arup K Chatterjee. So we will be joined by Professor Sudip Patra. So today we are going to discuss ideas about Erwin Schrödinger and his interests about Eastern philosophy. So over to you, Professor.
Okay, so this is um, promising to be a fascinating conversation, and I have my, let's say, my levels of excitement as well as my degrees of skepticism, and I'll come to that in a moment. So Schrodinger, Erwin Schrödinger, as maybe the two of you are aware, very famously or infamously named his dog as Atman. I don't know if you know about this anecdote. So this has been brought back to life by some authors of late, including the scientist Subhash Kak. Now, the relevance of this is that Erwin Schrödinger was, as most of us will know, even in the audience, he was fascinated by the Upanishads. Now, what does the word fascinated here mean? Because a lot of people, maybe a little bit of us included, have this, uncanny habit of uniting these two traits. One, a literary fascination, another, a scientific temperament. So the fascination with the Upanishads is, to my reckoning, more of a linguistic fascination, more of a fascination with metaphors or creativity or a certain kind of vocabulary which helps one articulate new kinds of findings. Fuzzy logic. What otherwise seem like dichotomies to the naked eye in the quantum world, quantum phenomena start looking a little bit like Eastern non-dualism, right? So that is as simply as I could put forward. Now, I'm sure both scientists and spiritualists would be after me, after my life. But why do we need to talk about Erwin Schrödinger? Isn't everything known already, Sudip? By that I mean. So on the one hand, there is this fascination that people have, particularly Indians or South Asians have, about Erwin Schrödinger and people like Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, all these scientific minds being interested in Eastern non-duality, Upanishads, Vedanta, and so on. But is there something beyond this? And have we understood entirely what this fascination actually conveys?
Yes, I think it's a very important question, Arun. And we need to be very kind of critical in some sense. Certainly, we know from popular science and popular explorations that starting from Niels Bohr to Heisenberg and certainly Schrödinger, they are very much they admired Indian philosophers in many senses. But then we have to go deeper and see that what they actually wrote and what they actually meant. Now, I will first of all start with Schrödinger's own view about quantum mechanics and then go into Eastern philosophies. You see that Schrödinger was rather quite critical. So it goes without saying that he is one of the founders of initial quantum mechanical ideas, one may say. Something what has been called as Copenhagen interpretation, or people would say Copenhagenish. And Copenhagenish is an important word because this conveys that there were a lot of differences in opinions among Bohr and Heisenberg and Schrödinger. Rather, when Schrödinger understood through his own works as well as later on Albert Einstein that there is something called as entanglement which can happen. Rather, entanglement word came out from his own writings. He was shocked, and he was so shocked that he wrote back to Einstein and others that he would have better not got into all of this and better to isolate himself from quantum physics. So that shows that he had a lot of doubt in mind. He had a lot of kind of non-linear interaction with quantum science, should I say. On one hand, his wave function, as we know, that is rather one of the bedrock of modern quantum physics. On the other hand, he was skeptical of some of its findings. Now, interestingly, later on, or from the very early age of his life, he was also quite attracted towards different philosophies, world philosophies, I should say. Even as early as in 1918, 1919, he came up with some write-ups, some interesting books, where he mentioned about Zen Buddhism, he mentioned about Advaita Vedanta particularly. Now, I find it is quite interesting because On one hand, he was quite skeptical of some of the modern findings of quantum mechanics. On the other hand, he was also quite attracted towards some of the implications of Upanishads philosophically, metaphorically for science. So it's a kind of very non-linear and complex mindset, I should say, rather than in oversimplistic. And as you have rightly mentioned, that is all about like simplification nowadays, oversimplification, that this is equivalent to that, not like that. So that is the reason we can turn to Schrodinger again and try to learn from that critical discourse.
So before we went into this conversation, Shobhit was saying something about Schrodinger's cat.
So
what was it?
So there is this infamous or famous, because no real cats were harmed in the performance of the experiment. It's a thought experiment. So it's about Schrodinger's cat. So would you like to say something about that for the audience?
Okay. So you see that Schrodinger's cat is certainly one of the most famous thought experiments after Albert Einstein's. Remember, Albert Einstein was very much fan of thought experiment style. So Schrodinger, in a way, actually teased the kind of findings of quantum mechanics in some sense. So he assumed that what happens if, say, the superposition principle, which very bluntly put is something like that, as till you do not observe any quantum system, it can legitimately be described as a superposition of different possibilities. Now Schrodinger basically just extended that to macroscopic, quote unquote macroscopic world, and where cat is like a metaphor of that. And then he understood that, well, if you just think that superposition principle is also working for the cat as a whole, or for the universe as a whole, if you keep on building upon that, then certainly we are forced to lead, or then we are certainly forced to accept that there will be some very shocking implications of that. What will be that? Say, for example, in Schrodinger's cat experiment, you have a cat inside the box, and there is a kind of like a gas or some system there, which if it breaks after a particular stipulated time due to some radioactive decay, then either the cat will be alive or the cat will be dead. Now animal lovers would say that no, don't use that, either the cat is kind of dreaming or kind of awake, something like that. So two states. Now till you do not open the door, or that's also a metaphor, until unless you make any interaction or measurement, it is perfectly legitimate in quantum mechanics to see that the cat will just evolve in a kind of like a superposition state of dead and alive, or dreaming and awake. And that is perfectly legitimate in quantum world. So then Schrodinger would say that, well, we don't see like this kind of things around. So we have to explain them. That we have to explain that why would you see only one typical output or outcome, that either the cat is dreaming or the cat is awake when you open the door or when you make a measurement. So what is that that is causing this superposition to change into our so-called classical world, where you only see only one outcome? Now that is also the crux of the matter, what is known as measurement problem in quantum mechanics. And till now there have been multiple attempts to make sense of that, but still it is an enigma.
So one of the big challenges of equating or even talking on the same platform about quantum mechanics and this trio, this very notorious trio of Heisenberg, Schrodinger and Bohr from the 20s and 30s, and Upanishads, is that immediately, no matter how many times we give this disclaimer, immediately people either, they start celebrating, look, this is the union between Eastern philosophy and European science, at least quantum science, or people start feeling triggered that those guys have come again, they're going to destroy our world now. So our way of life is going to be destroyed, our values are going to be uprooted. So I just want to bring in this reminder, hopefully a robust reminder, that we started this series on the philosophy of science with recourse to Vijnana Vedanta. And as far as Vijnana Vedanta and its proponents, particularly Swami Medhananda, make it absolutely clear that Vedanta is not merely a descriptive way of knowledge production. It is also quite prescriptive. It is an ethical model. So, if you know, Jagat Mithya Brahma Satya, if that is true, it is not merely true as a truth in itself. It is a truth for a purpose. That the Jagat is Mithya, not in so much as everybody else other than me is Mithya. That if my Brahma is Satya, then so is Shobhit's Brahma. So it is your Brahman. Right? So Brahman or Atman, these are not to be toyed with. So what is a measurement problem in quantum mechanics does seem to have correlates in modern day life, but that does not mean that we have to always or we can always problematize or we are allowed to problematize real life as much as we can in quantum mechanics. In other words, I'm simply saying that there is a very strong ethical model that Vedanta is offering. I don't know if this kind of a let's say acknowledgement of classicism of ethical code of conduct is there in the quantum theories.
Well, I think it is a very complex question.
Yeah.
You see that if you look at from a very pragmatic point of view or a physicalist point of view, even then certainly the question of ethics, etc., might not arise, and rather they might be quite frustrated by this question. That's why you are even raising these questions. On the other hand, it goes without saying that quantum philosophy of quantum mechanics, that has been quite complex, and there have been many perspectives to it. One more practical way of looking at this thing, as I understand, is basically you see that in today's world, it is simply not possible for us to ignore the implications of quantum technologies. So maybe after 50 years or so, we can really have a large-scale quantum computer kind of operating, rather than these market hypes. And during that kind of a time or that kind of a society, we really have to think that all these kind of quantum effects are day-to-day living kind of things. So you have to live with superposition, you have to live with entanglement. I do not know when that time will come, but it will come. So in that kind of a world, so there will be ethical implications of all of this. Let me give you one practical example, which is a fascinating literature which is coming up. It is often known as quantum games. Now, quantum games is actually playing with quantum technologies, and players like you and me and Shobhit, we can share quantum resources, and we can make some operations on those resources. And since they are quantum resources, they will in effect actually physically even follow all of those kind of principles. They will exhibit those principles. And if that is the case, then the results which we are going to get by physically playing quantum games will be very different from the standard game theoretic results like Nash equilibrium and so on. So there we really have to think hard that what will be the ethical implications, because we cannot avoid them as saying esoteric or abstract or something like that. So there I find that in that kind of a world, an interaction between Eastern philosophies and quantum physics per se might be fruitful. But again with caution. Certainly we maintain caution all the way around. For example, going back to Schrödinger again, Schrödinger was fascinated by what he called as doctrine of identity. So the way he read Upanishads was something like that the most basic principle of Upanishad is that there is some identity across all the quote-unquote minds, he said. And exactly as you have mentioning that there is a truth to Brahman for everyone. It is not like my Brahman versus your Brahman, nothing like that happens. So Schrödinger was very much aware of that. And he was saying that perhaps a futuristic science or a better science can be based on this doctrine of identity. Now, unfortunately, we are far from that. Remember that in the last episode also, maybe last to last, we mentioned a very interesting book, The Blind Spot. In The Blind Spot also scientists and authors are raising the same point, that today science has really been abstracted away from the real experience. So now they are not going into Brahman and so on, but what happens if futuristic science is based on this identity? That is a possibility.